Carl Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." For many, it looks like the slow erosion of your identity at the hands of a narcissist is what happens when they realize they can't control you anymore. That fate, narcissists don't walk away when you grow stronger, they strike, and not with rage or visible threats at least, not at first, and most terrifying of all. See, they strike with something quieter, more intimate, asserting boundaries, refusing to collapse into their neediness. So emotionally precise, Jung didn't live in the guilt into caretaking, or emotionally extort with a sigh and a wounded glance. Age of narcissistic abuse, TikToks or self-help YouTube channels, but he saw it all coming. It can undo years of healing in a matter of weeks. More devastating. Psychologists now call it manufactured vulnerability, a final manipulation so calculated. Carly described how manipulative personalities survive not through open violence, but through the mastery of the unconscious, in his work on the shadow self. And the moment you start reclaiming that unconscious, when you begin noticing patterns, that's when they panic. They realize something that terrifies them. Robin Stern, in The Gaslight Effect, describes this phase perfectly. You are no longer food, and now they need a new plan. You're no longer their audience, no longer the person they could subtly insult. You've stepped into your power dock. When a narcissist senses their control slipping, they will often play one final card, a performance of need, of suffering, of authentic brokenness that is anything but real. It's emotional theater, and the stage is you. They'll create a crisis that makes you doubt everything. And if you don't know what to look for, if you haven't been warned, it will feel so real, so urgent, so familiar, that you'll walk right back into their story like you never left. But before I reveal what this final dirty trick looks like and why it works so effectively on even the strongest survivors, you need to understand the psychological war that leads up to it. Because as Carl Jung and modern psychologists like Dr. Nicola Parra, Ross Rosenberg, and Dr. Stern have all confirmed, narcissists don't seek love, they seek control. And the moment you stop giving it to them, they will use every illusion, every memory, every tear, and every crisis to take it back. Most people think narcissists fear abandonment, or being alone or not being loved. But Carl Jung saw something deeper, something more primal. He said their true fear isn't being left behind, it's being overpowered, not physically but psychologically. See, a narcissist builds their identity on a fragile illusion of superiority. They are not strong. They are propped up by attention, control, and the belief that they are smarter, more valuable, or more essential than the people around them. And as long as you needed them emotionally, financially, spiritually, they felt safe, because they could control the terms of the relationship. They were the teacher, the guide, the irreplaceable source. But the moment you begin to heal, that illusion begins to shatter. You stop asking for their approval. You start trusting your instincts. You set boundaries not to punish them, but to protect yourself. And to them, that's betrayal. Carl Jung called this shift the power inversion, when the dynamic silently reverses. The person they once saw as dependent is now clear-eyed, steady, unshakable. You'll reflect back to them the very thing they've spent their entire life avoiding. And for the narcissist, that's intolerable, because now, their own inadequacy. Dr. Nicola Parra describes this moment as the rupture in the trauma bond. When the one being used finally sees the pattern, it creates what she calls ego death for the abuser. It threatens the core lie that they are the center of your world. That's why narcissists don't just quietly disappear when you grow. They fight harder, because it's not love they're losing, it's their source of power. And here's where it gets even more dangerous. They don't just fear your independence, they resent it. Because your healing dose and tea just remind them that you've changed. It reminds them that they have in tea, that you chose growth, and they chose control. In The Mountain Is You, Brianna Wiest writes that the people most threatened by your evolution will often disguise their fear as criticism. You've changed. You're full of yourself now. You're not the person you used to be. But listen closely. The part of you they're attacking, it's the healthiest part, the strongest, the truest, because it's no longer serving them. And when a narcissist senses that shift, they won't congratulate you, they'll strategize. Because what they fear most, what Jung saw as the crux of their unraveling, is this, that you've stepped outside of their shadow, and now you're casting your own. To understand the narcissist's next move, you have to understand the engine that drives them, the inflated ego. Carl Jung described it as a fragile, bloated version of the self built not on truth, but on delusion. A mask so polished, so convincing, even they start believing it. But like all masks, it's hollow underneath. The narcissist cannot exist without an audience. They need someone to admire them, submit to them, or play the lesser role. Not because they're strong, but because without that imbalance, they don't know who they are. In Jungian psychology, this is the danger of the ego without soul. It feeds off external validation, praise, obedience, and control. And when you were hurting, they fed well. When you doubted yourself, they became your compass. When you needed help, they became your savior. When you craved love, they became your obsession. but it was never about you. It was about what you gave them. Your confusion gave them power. Your self-sacrifice gave them control. Your silence gave them safety. You weren't a person in their story. You were supply. And the moment that supply began to dry up, they didn't mourn. They panicked. In the Narcissist's playbook, Dana Morningstar explains that narcissists feed not just on attention but on emotional regulation. They outsource their self-worth by controlling yours. So when you start to shift, when you stop chasing their validation and start listening to your inner voice, they lose more than your attention. They lose their reflection. Because without someone to dominate, they feel invisible. And invisibility is unbearable to the inflated ego. That's why they don't congratulate your healing. That's why they don't support your growth. Because your strength forces them to confront a truth they cannot handle, that they are not essential to you anymore. And that's a death sentence to their identity. So what do? They attack, not always through violence or anger but through subtle sabotage. They interrupt your peace with urgent emergencies. They downplay your growth with snide comments. They test your boundaries under the guise of closeness. You used to tell me everything. Why are you being so distant? I miss when we could just talk without you acting like a therapist. You think you're so enlightened now, huh? Each line carefully crafted to trigger doubt, to pull you back into the web, because your healing exposes their dependency. And to the narcissist, that's intolerable. In Will I Ever Be Free of You, Dr. Carol McBride writes that narcissists don't just want presence. They want control of your thoughts, your emotions, yourself. But here's the truth. They'll never admit. If your worth depends on them, they win. But the moment you realize it never did, their entire structure begins to collapse. And they'll do anything to stop that collapse. Even if it means pretending to love you while secretly plotting to weaken you. Even if it means playing the victim just to stay in your life. Even if it means turning your strength into the new battlefield. Because to a narcissist with an inflated ego, power is not shared. It's taken. Something begins to shift when you start healing. Subtly at first. A missed text you don't rush to answer. A conversation where you say no and don't feel the need to explain yourself. A moment where their silence doesn't fill you with panic. Just peace. But what feels like freedom to you feels like war to them. This is the moment Carl Jung called the Power Inversion Crisis. When the roles silently reverse. When the one who was once small, unsure, dependent, becomes solid, centered, and unshakably clear. And in the eyes of the narcissist, this is nothing short of betrayal. You were supposed to orbit around them. You were supposed to bend, apologize, question yourself. But now, you don't. And that terrifies them. See, narcissists rely on emotional hierarchy. There has to be a winner and a lose. And when you rise, even silently, you tilt that dynamic. You don't need them to tell you who you are anymore. You don't seek their praise. You're no longer addicted to their approval. That's when they know they're losing control. In Set Boundaries, Find Peace, Nedra Glover, Tawab writes that healthy people adjust to your growth. But toxic people attack it because your confidence, your clarity, your peace reflects everything they refuse to build within themselves. And instead of rising with you, they try to pull you back down. They'll do it with passive-aggressive comments. Oh, wow, look at you now. You think you're better than everyone. They'll do it with guilt. You used to be so kind. Now all you care about is yourself. Or they'll wrap it in concern. I just don't want you to lose who you were. But listen closely. Who you were was someone they could manipulate. Someone who kept the peace by abandoning yourself. Someone who mistook silence for safety. That version of you is gone. And now, the moment when the shadow that projected onto you no longer sticks. In Jung's terms, this is the collapse of the false dynamic. They can call you selfish, but you know you're protecting your peace. They can say you've changed, but you know you've simply come home to yourself. And that's when the narcissist escalates, because the power inversion crisis isn't just about loss. It's about panic. They don't know how to exist without control. They don't know how to sit with their own shame. They don't know how to accept that the person they once dominated is now out of reach. And so, they scramble. Some lash out with rage. Others retreat and sulk, hoping you'll chase. But the most dangerous ones, they get clever. They don't come at you head. They come sideways through memories, guilt, random crises. Because if they can't dominate your mind, they'll aim for your heart. And that's when the real manipulation begins. So if you're feeling guilty for growing, if someone keeps reminding you of how nice you used to be, if they make you feel like your healing is hurting them, pause. That's not love. That's a power struggle. And the only way to win it is not to play. Once you break free from the narcissist's emotional grip, you expect the attacks to stop. You think the criticisms will fade, the blame will lessen, and maybe just maybe they'll finally leave you alone. But they don't, because now they're fighting for something far more precious than your attention. They're fighting for your doubt. And they'll use one of the most disturbing tools Carl Jung ever warned us about: psychological projection warfare. At first, it's subtle. You've changed, Dan, not for the better. You used to be so generous. Now you're selfish. Success has made you arrogant. You're not as kind as you used to be. These statements may sound like criticism, but they're far more strategic than that. They're not attacking your flaws anymore. They're attacking your healing. Carl Jung explained that the narcissist driven by the need to maintain an inflated ego will begin projecting their own shame onto the person who is evolving. They can no longer call you broken, so they begin to call you cold. They can no longer call you weak, so they accuse you of being harsh. They can no longer control your choices, so they say you've become. This tactic is what Jung referred to as a reversal of projection, where your strength becomes their new target because it threatens everything they've ever constructed about themselves and their place in your life. And the more they shame your growth, the more you may feel the temptation to shrink again just to keep the peace. This is exactly what Dr. Robin Stern, in The Gaslight Effect, describes as strength shaming, a method of turning your evolution into a weapon against you. You start to wonder, am I really being selfish? You question, maybe I am being too independent, too cold, too confident. But those doubts don't come from truth. They come from conditioning, from years of being trained to believe that love means shrinking, that being nice means being silent, that caring means saying yes when everything in your body screams no. When strength shaming doesn't work, narcissists escalate the game. They stop blaming you directly and instead suggest that your healing is the cause of the relationship's breakdown. They'll say things like, ever since you started reading those self-help books, we've drifted apart. Or, you never questioned me before you started therapy. The subtext, your self-awareness is the problem, not their behavior, not their control, not their emotional abuse. In Stop Walking on Eggshells, the authors explain that this is a form of emotional bullying, where your empowerment becomes the excuse they use to pull you back into submission. But listen closely. If someone criticizes you for setting healthy boundaries, for speaking up with respect, for choosing rest over burnout, they're not afraid of losing you. They're afraid of losing control over you. Because once you fully embrace your new strength, they have nothing left to manipulate. Carl Jung taught that every act of projection is a reflection of unintegrated pain. So when they shame your healing, they're revealing how far they've buried their own. And that's not your burden to carry. So the next time someone tells you that your confidence is arrogance, or that your boundaries make you difficult, or that your silence is cruelty, ask yourself this: who benefits when I stay small? Because sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is simply keep growing loudly, unapologetically, and without explanation. When shame doesn't work, when they realize you no longer flinch at guilt or bend under pressure, the narcissist tries something softer, more seductive. They put away the sword and reach for the scrapbook, and suddenly you're not being attacked, you're being missed. Remember when you used to laugh at my jokes? You were so fun before therapy made you overthink everything. We were so good together before you started putting up walls. On the surface it sounds like longing, but underneath, it's not about you, it's about power. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He taught that when someone begins to lose control over you in the present, they will attempt to anchor you to a version of yourself from the past, a version that was more agreeable, more dependent, more easily shaped. Jung warned that this regression isn't random, it's psychological time travel. The narcissist isn't reminiscing to reconnect. They're trying to repossess the weaker version of you. Dr. Shefali, in A Radical Awakening, describes this as nostalgic conditioning, the weaponization of memory to make you question your evolution. They paint the past as golden, not because it was healthy, but because it was convenient for them. And if you're not careful, it works. You begin to second-guess yourself. Was I happier before I set boundaries? Was I too harsh, too quick to change? Maybe they're right. Maybe I've lost something. But here's the trap. They're not missing the real you, they're missing the malleable you. The one who apologized for everything. The one who stayed silent to avoid conflict. The one who confused keeping the peace with being loved. This tactic is especially effective because it targets your longing for connection, not your weakness, your humanity. In Drama-Free, Nedra Glover Tywab explains that emotionally manipulative people often use past closeness as proof that you're the one who has changed for the worse. But in reality, you've simply grown. You've outgrown the dynamic where you had to abandon yourself to belong. You've evolved past the version of the relationship that depended on your silence. So when they say, I miss the old you, they don't mean the version of you that laughed more. They mean the version of you who didn't know better. And when they say, we were happier back then, what they mean is, I was more comfortable when you didn't have boundaries. It's not about shared memories, it's about emotional leverage. Because if they can get you to look backward with longing, you might stop moving forward with clarity. You might forget how lonely it felt to be misunderstood. You might forget how much you cried after pleasing them. You might forget how much of yourself you had to give away, just to feel seen. So here's the truth. If the past they're asking you to return to required you to shrink, it wasn't love. It was control wrapped in nostalgia. And you don't owe anyone a return ticket to the version of yourself you had to heal from. Let them miss the old you. That version is gone. You're not going back. You're building something new. And the only people allowed in are those who celebrate your growth, not those who mourn their loss of control. When shame doesn't break you, and nostalgia can't pull you back, the narcissist reaches for their most deceptive weapon, yet the one Carl Jung considered among the darkest forms of manipulation, manufactured vulnerability. It doesn't arrive with hostility. It arrives with trembling hands, red eyes, and a trembling voice. Suddenly, they're not attacking you. They're falling apart. They're in crisis. They've lost their job. Their health is declining. They're going through something no one else understands. And guess who they turn to? You're the same person they once belittled, ignored, manipulated. Now you're the only one who truly gets them. It's not a coincidence. It's a strategy. Carl Jung warned that manipulators often store away your deepest compassion like a weapon in a drawer, waiting for the perfect moment to draw it out and aim it right at your heart. Ross Rosenberg, in The Human Magnet Syndrome, describes this phase in chilling detail. He says narcissists are expert actors, and when their power begins to slip, they craft a performance so convincing that even the strongest, most self-aware survivors find themselves pulled back in, because now the narcissist isn't threatening you. They're wounded. They need you. And if you're someone who naturally nurtures, who feels others' pain deeply, this isn't just manipulation, it's a trap set specifically for you. Dr. Nicola P. in How to Do the Work explains that many empaths confuse emotional responsibility with moral obligation. You begin to think, if I don't help them now, what kind of person am I? If they're really in pain, how can I walk away? And this is where the trap tightens, because even if the pain is real, you are not obligated to abandon yourself to soothe it. But the narcissists will try to convince you otherwise. They'll say things like, I know you have your boundaries, but this is different. I just need a little help just this once. I'm really struggling. I thought you, of all people, would understand. It feels personal. But Jung would tell you it's calculated. It's not that they don't have other people to turn to. It's that they know you're the one most likely to break your own rules. In the body keeps the score. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk explains how trauma survivors, especially those conditioned to keep the pesaar, are highly susceptible to emotional baiting. The narcissist knows that. They've studied you. They know what to say to activate your guilt and override your clarity. And here's the twist that will make your stomach drop. Jung observed that many narcissists don't just wait for a crisis. They create one. They start fights, quit jobs, provoke others just to engineer a moment of collapse that they can then bring to your doorstep. Because if you rush in to rescue them, they win. Not just your help, but your energy, your time, your attention, your power, and worst of all, they get you to do something no one else could. Break your own boundaries. They don't just want you to come back. They want you to prove that your growth isn't real, that you still belong to them, that their crisis matters more than your progress. So here's what you need to remember. Just because someone is struggling doesn't mean you're the one meant to save them. You can care deeply and still walk away. You can offer compassion and still say no. Because love that requires you to betray yourself isn't love. It's bondage disguised as mercy. And Jung was right. The most dangerous manipulation is not the one that angers you. It's the one that breaks your heart just enough to reopen the door. There's a moment after the narcissist shares their crisis when your chest tightens, your stomach flips, your mind goes silent, while your heart screams, help them. This is not logic. This is programming. And for the narcissist, it's the final lever, the one that works when nothing else does. Carl Jung warned that manipulators don't just take advantage of your weaknesses. They exploit your virtues, your kindness, your loyalty, your empathy. And when their control starts slipping, they don't fight with anger. They fight with your compassion. It's no longer you owe me. It's I'm falling apart and I have no one but you. It's you always cared. What changed? It's I know you said you're done, but you're not like the others. You're better than that. And just like that, you're pulled in again. Not by obligation, not even by hope, but by the belief that turning away from someone in pain is wrong. Ross Rosenberg, in The Human Magnet Syndrome, explains that empaths and caretakers have a specific vulnerability. They don't just feel others' pain, they internalize it. They begin to see helping as a moral duty and walking away as cruelty. But here's the truth. Not all cries for help are innocent. Not all suffering is spontaneous. Some people fall apart strategically when they realize guilt is the only currency left. And narcissists, they're masterful at tracking what makes you bend. They remember the stories you shared about your family, your past relationships, your traumas. They catalog every moment when you put someone else's needs above your own. And when the time is right, they mirror your pain back to you just enough to disarm you. Dr. Robert Glover, in No More Mr. Nice Guy, writes that people who are conditioned to please and rescue often confuse being needed with being loved. And that's where narcissists strike. They don't want your support. They want your surrender. And they want you to hand it over willingly. So how do you know when your empathy is being weaponized? You'll notice 3 signs. Urgency that overrides your peace. You feel pressure to respond, act, help now. No time to think, breathe, or reflect. Guilt disguised as moral appeal. They don't say, you have to. They say, I thought you were better than this. And it hits harder. Self-betrayal masked as compassion. You break your own rules, lower your boundaries, and silence your truth because they need you. But let's be clear. Compassion does not require self, and helping someone in pain should never mean injuring yourself in the process. Carl Jung believed that the highest form of love is found in conscious care, the kind that chooses truth over guilt and discernment over emotional compulsion. Because once your empathy is no longer free, once it's being coerced, manipulated, or guilted out of you, it's no longer love, it's bondage. And the narcissist knows this. They count on your good heart to work against you. So the next time someone collapses in front of you, after months or years of manipulation, pause. Ask yourself, is this real connection, or just the final hook? Because the narcissist's last hope isn't that you'll believe their lies. It's that you'll ignore your truth in the name of being a good person. That you can be good without being used. You can be kind without being controlled. And your empathy is sacred. It was never meant to be a leash. It rarely starts with a demand. Not at this stage. You've grown too much for that. Now it starts with something gentler. A sigh, a pause, a request wrapped in humility. I know this isn't your responsibility, but can you help me just this once? That phrase, just this once, is the narcissist's scalpel. It slices through your boundaries, not by force, but by emotion. And if you say yes, they know. The door is open again. Carl Jung warned that one of the greatest dangers to the evolving soul is self-betrayal disguised as compassion. He believed the ego, once confronted with spiritual awakening, doesn't always resist with violence sometimes. It resists with guilt, and narcissists are expert surgeons of guilt. In Boundaries, Dr. Henry Cloud writes that toxic people will often test your limits softly, first probing for weak spots. And when they find one, they apply pressure until it cracks. The crack doesn't feel like destruction, it feels like being kind. But here's the truth. If just this once causes you to violate your own healing, it's not kindness. It's relapse. Let's look at how this plays out. You've decided not to lend money anymore. You've set that line. But suddenly, they're behind on rent. They plead, I know you don't usually do this, but I'm desperate. You're the only one I can trust. You've ended the relationship. But they message late at night, I'm not asking for anything. I just need someone to talk to. Just this once. You've told them you need space to heal. And then they show up at your door, looking broken. I know you said you needed time, but I need you now. These moments feel like crossroads. And in a way they are, because every just this once is a disguised contract. It says, let me prove that I still matter more than your peace. It says, show me that my need outweighs your growth. Gavin de Becker reminds us that manipulative people don't always speak threats aloud. It says, sacrifice yourself to comfort me. In the gift of fear, sometimes the most dangerous messages are silent. That helping makes you worthy. That saying no makes you cruel. That if you don't bend, someone else might break. But here's what the narcissist never expects. That you'll pause, take a breath, and say, I understand you're struggling, but I'm no longer abandoning myself to help others survive. That answer is unthinkable to them, because they don't just want assistance. They want to prove they still have a key to your internal world. Carl Jung believed that the evolution of the soul requires what he called sacred resistance, the ability to stand in love without falling into servitude, to be available to truth, but unavailable to manipulation. So the next time someone whispers just this once, ask yourself, what am I giving up to give in? Is this compassion? Or is this coercion? Will I feel at peace after this, or resentful? Because real healing isn't tested by the obvious attacks. It's tested in the quiet moments where you're invited to become who you used to be, in the name of being good. But you don't owe anyone your regression, not even if they're crying, not even if they say it's love, especially then. So what do? When someone you once loved is spiraling in pain, and you're the one they turn to, what do? When your heart still feels their suffering, but your mind knows the cost of stepping back into their world. Carl Jung offered a concept both radical and healing: differentiated compassion. It's the idea that you can care deeply without becoming responsible for someone else's chaos. It's the art of staying connected to your empathy without abandoning yourself in the process. Too many of us were raised to believe that love means sacrifice, that saying no is cruel, that walking away is unkind. But compassion doesn't require self-erasure. In The Subtle Art of Not Giving a FCK*, Mark Manson says that boundaries aren't walls, they're gates. They're what allow real love in and emotional extortion out. When someone is in genuine pain, you can support them without rescuing them. You can offer a kind word without offering your energy, your time, your safety, your identity. Dr. Nicola Parra, in How to Do the Work, writes that the moment you begin healing, you will be tested not by new enemies, but by familiar roles. People will want the old version of you to return, the one who gave too much, apologized too quickly, stayed too long. But this is the moment you ask yourself the question Jung posed: is helping me become who I truly am, or is it preventing me from that journey? Because there is a kind of help that empowers, and there is a kind of help that real compassion does not ask you to bleed so that someone else can stay comfortable. It does not whisper, be less so I can feel more, shrink so I don't have to grow. If the price of helping someone is the erosion of your peace, your values, your healing, it's no longer help. It's a relapse dressed as virtue. And the narcissist knows this. They won't ask you to destroy yourself in one blow. They'll ask you to chip away at your growth slowly, quietly, compassionately, just this once, just a little time, just a small exception. But each small step back is a step away from your truth, and you don't have to take it. Carl Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who they need, not who they remember, not who they can control." So the next time you feel pulled into someone else's chaos, breathe, feel your heart, hold your empathy like a sacred flame, and then choose, not from guilt, not from fear, but from self-respect, because you can love someone deeply and still walk away. You can forgive them and still never let them back in. You can hope the best for them and still choose you. That is differentiated compassion. That is soul maturity, and that is what Jung was pointing to all along. Not coldness, not rejection, but clarity. The kind of clarity that lets you say, "I love you, but not at the expense of myself." You've resisted the shame, you've stood firm through the nostalgia, you've seen through the crisis, and you've honored your healing over their chaos. Now, the narcissist is left with one final truth, one they can't manipulate, twist, or gaslight away. They never had real power over you, only the power you gave them. Carl Jung believed that the deepest battle in life is between illusion and truth, between the false selves we were to survive, and the authentic soul waiting to emerge beneath. And that's what makes narcissistic control so dangerous. It doesn't shackle your body, it shackles your mind. It teaches you that love is earned through submission, that your needs are too much, that your voice is a threat, that your silence is a virtue. But the moment you begin to see, truly see, that these were never truths, only tools, the whole structure begins to collapse. They called you selfish when you chose yourself. They called you cold when you stopped playing the caretaker. They said you'd changed, and you did. You became free. And that's the moment the narcissist fears the most. Not when you leave, not when you say goodbye, but when you stop needing their validation to exist, because now you're not playing the role they wrote for you. You're not the savior. You're not the fool. You're not the reflection they polished to see their own glory. You are you, fully formed, clear-eyed, rooted in your values, unapologetically whole, in the courage to be disliked. Ichiro Kishimi writes that true freedom is found the moment we stop living to satisfy the expectations of others. And for the narcissists, that moment is their undoing. Because they didn't just want control, they wanted proof. Proof that they mattered more than your growth, more than your voice, more than your soul. And now they know they don't. They were never the light. They were the curtain, the illusion, the echo chamber of insecurity dressed as dominance. And when you don't answer the phone, when you don't rush to rescue, when you don't bite the bait one more time, you're not being heartless. You're being sovereign. You're not losing them. You're recovering yourself. Carl Jung taught that healing isn't about becoming someone new, about remembering who you were before the world convinced you otherwise, before they convinced you that love had to hurt, that boundaries were selfish, that peace had to be earned through pain. But here's the final revelation. You were always powerful. You just forgot. And every time you choose yourself again, you remind the narcissist and yourself that their power was never real. It was borrowed. It was fear. It was a performance sustained only by your silence. Now, you've seen behind the curtain. You've spoken your truth. You've stepped out of the fog, and no manufactured crisis, no guilt-laced plea, no whispered memory of who you used to be is worth trading that freedom away. You've already won. You're already free, and no one gets to take that from you again. If you've made it this far, something inside you has already shifted. Maybe it's a quiet knowing. Maybe it's a burning realization. Or maybe it's the first time in a long time. You feel seen. This isn't just about narcissists. It's not even just about manipulation. It's about you. The you beneath the conditioning. The you beneath the pleasing, the proving, the surviving. Carl Jung once said, people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. But you didn't avoid it. You walked straight into the fire of truth. And you didn't burn. You remembered. Remembered that your kindness is not a weakness. Your compassion is not a debt. And your boundaries are not punishments. They're sacred lines drawn in devotion to your own wholeness. The narcissist may never apologize. They may never admit what they did. They may never change, but they don't have to. Because you did, you broke the cycle. You questioned the script, you reclaimed a pen. And from this moment forward, you are not the villain for choosing yourself. You are not selfish for walking away from chaos. You are not cruel for refusing to be controlled. You are awake. In Women Who Run with the Wolves, Dr. Clarissa Pinkola writes, the most important thing is to hold on, to have heart, for we have been to the precipice, and we know. You know what it's like to feel erased, to question your reality, to love someone who made you disappear in the process. But now, you know something else. You know what it's like to rise, to speak, to set a boundary and not flinch, to say no without explaining, to say yes to yourself. And that is the real miracle. You are no longer living for their approval. You are living for your alignment, for your healing, for your becoming. You've made it through shame, through nostalgia, through manipulation, through grief, through guilt, and now you're standing in the one place the narcissist never expected you to reach: self-trust. So what now? Now you breathe, you rest, you protect your peace like the sacred thing it is. You stop defending your choices to people committed to misunderstanding them. You stop explaining your worth to people who can only hear through control. And if you're still in the thick of it, if you're just beginning this journey, hear this: you're not crazy, you're not cruel, you're not broken. You're waking up. Every time you resist their manipulation, every time you choose stillness over reactivity, every time you say, "This doesn't feel safe," you are doing the work Jung described as the highest task of the soul, to become who you truly are. And no amount of tears, threats, or tactics can take that from you unless you hand it over. So don't hold the line. Stay the course. Choose you. Because freedom isn't the absence of narcissists. It's the presence of yourself. And you are finally home. If this resonated with you, subscribe for more content that honors your healing, and share this with someone who may still be trapped in the fog. Because when one of us breaks the cycle, we give permission for others to do the same. And that is how healing becomes a revolution.